Hello and welcome to the Catarium and You. This is part of an ongoing series that takes a deep dive into the board game Kingdom Death Monster and just really gets into the old cogs and nitty gritty and bits and pieces of everything that we possibly can. The Catarium is our subject for this video. It is the first monster based crafting location that many players are going to unlock. You get it by killing a level 1 or higher white lion for the very first time. So you don't get this for the prologue white lion, but you will be able to have access to it after your first hunt if you hunt a white lion, which most players will do in their first ever campaign. The Catarium has 6 pieces of armour, 5 weapons, sort of, and 4 items. And as such, it's kind of teaching you that, hey, monster resources are more flexible than basic resources. You can use them on a location for a whole bunch of different things. Also, you can always use monster resources for their base versions, and that may be something you consider and think about. So, we're going to start by getting straight into the gear because there's no endeavours to deal with. And we're going to start with the weapons. So let's take a look at the gear cards, shall we? Here we go. Right, so we begin with the Lion Beast Catar. Starting with this one because it's probably one of the most important weapons that you will encounter in the early game in your first few playthroughs. And it also has access to a couple of new abilities which are interesting and you sort of want to pay attention to how they work. So, let's take a gander at this. The Lion Beast Catar is constructed with 1 lion claw and 1 hide. The lion claw is a specific type of bone that you'll get from the white lion. The hide can be any kind of hide. So it is, for the early game, relatively expensive because you're sacrificing the ability to construct a piece of rawhide armor if you make this. But as we're going to see when we go through this, it is worth it. The cost is justified. So it is a weapon, it's melee, very standard. We know how all that works. We'll now look at Catar very quickly itself. So Catars are actually, I think it's really interesting that they've been included into Kingdom Death. They're a form of punch or push dagger, specifically from India, where they have both weapon and ceremonial historical uses. It's interesting how close the Lion Beast Catar is to the traditional design. But Catars themselves in Kingdom Death is a little bit of a broader category. They also cover knuckle dusters and bladed gloves. I think it's fascinating, and this is actually one of the things, if I ever did have a chance to sit down with Adam and have a conversation, I'd probably ask what inspired him to include Catars, because it's not a weapon you typically think of. Even, games that are quite broad in their weapon choices and categories, like, say, Monster Hunter, don't really have Catars as their own thing. Anyway, just an aside, I find them interesting. I really like them. So let's get on to the actual weapon itself. Catar is categorized as a defensive weapon, but it's interesting in that it isn't purely for defense, it is instead defensive when you're attacking. So it's a defensive offensive weapon type. Its first ability here on specialization is when attacking with a Catar, cancel reactions on the first selected hit location. Really powerful because you get to draw all those hit locations, take a look, decide which one you're like, okay, I don't really want to deal with this reaction, so you go for that one first and you can ignore the reaction. Very useful, and another fun spin on that whole thing that we see like Sword doing as well, where you get to pre-roll. It's a different variant of that with some really crunchy decisions. The mastery is just really fun. It's phenomenal. When you're Catar Master, you get +1 evasion token on a perfect hit with a Catar. If you do get knocked down, you remove all the evasion tokens. So this is what I mean by it being an offensively defensive weapon, because it helps you defend by attacking. It makes it a very good frontline tank class of weapon, but there's something that you're going to find is I don't recommend you take Catar as a weapon proficiency in the core game. Not because it's bad, it's good, but it's because you only have a very limited number of Catars available. The Catarium Lion Beast Catar and the Stone Circle Beast Knuckle, and then that's it. That's it, there's nothing else, and the Beast Knuckle is not strong enough to take you all the way through 30 Lantern Years, so it's kind of a weapon type that plateaus very quickly and then falls off really fast. If you do want to play with Catars throughout the whole campaign, there's 3 expansions I can highly recommend. The first one's the Lion Knight, which on completion of its particular story, you will get access to 2 very powerful and unique Catars that are super interesting and fun to play with. The Dung Beetle Knight, which will give you a Catar for the mid-game that can be upgraded into an end-game Catar. So you've got your progression there in a fun and interesting fashion. And then finally, the White Giga Lion, Vignette of Death. This actually has a People of the Lantern specific upgrade for the Lion Beast Catar in the end game. So that's my 3 recommendations. I don't think you should be like making a Catar master if you don't have access to one of those in your campaign, but you should still be crafting these. Instead, you craft these and then you use them with whoever it is that is trying to score their Fist and Tooth points. Because Fist and Tooth has Deadly, it leverages luck in the same way that the Lion Beast Catar does. Speaking of which, let's get on to these abilities. Deadly. So outside of Fist and Tooth, this is the first time we see Deadly. Deadly is very straightforward, +1 luck with the weapon. You can have higher levels of Deadly, as we're going to see in a couple of weapons down the line in this video. And extra luck stacks with any other sources of luck. So if your survivor has +1 luck because of, say, a death principle, or you have a mask that gives you more luck, or even a lucky charm, then you can put that on top of it and just get more and more chances of scoring critical wounds. Critical wounds are great because they ignore normal monster reactions. They often punish the monster harder, and also they can generate resources. And that's what makes the Lion Beast Catar such a fixture of many early game campaigns, is this Deadly. It helps generate resources. If you want to play the game in a very controlling playstyle and you want to do critical wound farming, then the Lion Beast Catar is one of your first ports of call, and it is supported by one of the items in this particular crafting location. Paired, on the other hand, Paired is overall, I think, a neutral ability. It's not bad to have it on a weapon, but you may often just use one of a Paired. And the reason for that is the second weapon that you craft is effectively just plus the weapon speed. It doubles the weapon speed. So you could craft a Lion Beast Catar and then a second one, and if you put them both on the same gear grid, all you're doing is you're paying a Lion Claw and a Hide for +2 speed. You may have builds that want to do that. You may enjoy rolling the dice, so that's all absolutely fine. But typically I won't do that in the early game. I might do it if I'm looking for fun. I'm looking to be a bit like off meta. Essentially, Paired is fine to use as long as you're conscious of the fact that it's going to have upsides and downsides. I think Paired gets better with Catars when you have access to better mid and late game weapons, Catar weapons, so you can then really make use of this specialization to offset the potential downsides of higher speed. There are no affinities to speak of, obviously a negative, but it's fine. Powerful weapon, no affinities is the price it pays. And then we have our weapon profile. 2 speed, absolutely fine. We discussed that in the Bonesmith video. 2 speed is very standard and it's great. 7+ accuracy is a little low, and that can mean the Lion Beast Catar tends to want to be used from the blind spot, because 7+ is just a 40% chance of hitting. With 2 speed, not great, but that does have some benefits if you were running paired, because then you can roll 4 dice at 7+, and kind of be like, okay, well on average I'm going to score maybe 2 hits-ish, napkin, probability math, yeah, you know. Finally, 3 strength. As I discussed before, for hunting toughness 8 monsters, 3 strength is on the money what I wanted to minimum, so that's great. I'm very happy with 3 strength. I can supplement that further with survivor strength, or even with a monster tooth necklace. But because the Lion Beast guitar doesn't have any red affinities, you're less likely to use it with a monster tooth necklace. You're more likely to pair it with a lucky charm and leverage the deadly and try and use that further into the campaign. So it's, on the whole, it's perfectly fine. I think your first Lion Beast guitar is amazing. Your second Lion Beast guitar is also amazing. Beyond that, I don't think you really want to be bothering making number 3 and 4, unless you've got 2 people who really love dual wielding Lion Beast guitars, in which case let them live their dreams, you know. So, fantastic weapon. Speaking of fantastic weapons, here's the King Spear. This is the first time Spear is going to appear in this campaign and in this series. Spear is a really good weapon type. We're going to look at that in a moment. But this costs a Lion Claw and a Great Cat Bone. So it is clashing with the Lion Beast guitar in respect to how much resource pressure you're experiencing. I would say I would craft a Lion Beast guitar first, and then I would probably craft a King Spear second, like for my second Lion Claw. And then my third Lion Claw, I'd probably put on another Lion Beast guitar. And I'd be very happy with that, because that is 3 of the 4 weapons I want to be using in the early game if I only really have the White Lion to be hunting. On the keywords, outside of Spear, it has 2 semi-negative keywords, heavy and two-handed. I'm not going to go into these into too much detail. I talked about it a lot with the Bone Club. They're just downsides you live with, and that's okay. On abilities, it's got Reach 2. Reach is really good. Reach 2 means instead of being able to hit 4 squares, you can hit 12 squares. That is very, very powerful. It has a lot of benefit with monster armor abilities. We'll talk about that when we get to the armor set. But on the whole, it's fantastic. Now let's get across to the specialization and the mastery and talk about that. So, Spear weapon proficiency is super unique. When attacking with a spear, if you draw a trap, roll 1d10. On a 7+, cancel the trap, discard it, then reshuffle the hit location discard into the hit location deck and draw a new card. Limit once per round. So this is a 40% chance of ignoring the trap if you hit it on an attack. You could redraw into the trap. That is the way it goes, but it is a phenomenally powerful ability, and it has a whole play style around it of like trap springers, trappers, disarmers, where you just use Spear into the trap to try and get a fresh reset of the hit location deck without suffering the punishment price of the trap. Fantastic. The mastery is also really cool and unique. Whenever a Spearmaster hits a monster with a spear, they may spend 1 survival to gain the priority target token, meaning that you get to dictate where the monster's going to go if it's choosing just 1 target. If you make the hit from directly behind another survivor, that survivor gains the priority target token instead. Super cool, so you can stand behind a heavily armoured defensive brick wall of a survivor who's got shields covering everywhere and masses of metal, and you can keep the monster targeting that survivor instead of it going wherever it wants to go. Dictating the monster's AI is phenomenal. Also, all survivors gain spear specialization in addition to the other weapon proficiencies. As mentioned, this is a really good specialization. So for me, this is the 3rd best weapon type in the game. I want shield, I want fist and tooth, and I want spear on every one of my settlements in the core game, and that's going to stay that way until we possibly experience something that doesn't have so much in the way of good spear progression. Because that's the other thing about spears. Spears have this phenomenal progression on them in the core game. You go from the King Spear to a Phoenix-based spear to a Blacksmith-based spear, and that Blacksmith-based spear can be upgraded further. So there is a spear for every single portion of the campaign, and there's even a one-handed emergency spear that you can use if your spear master loses one of their arms for some reason. You've been unlucky. So that is a flex option as well. So ultimately, King Spear is a must craft for me. I'm going to be making one of them, and I'm going to be genuinely crafting it Lion Beast Guitar, King Spear, and then Lion Beast Guitar for my Lion Claws. This red affinity, it's fine. Okay, it's not particularly good because of the direction it's pointing, but it is absolutely fine. It's not bad to have affinities, so that's something. Okay, so that's two really, really good weapons. How about we look at a third really good weapon? Say hello to the Catgut Bow. This is our first bow, so we're going to get to talk about bows and how powerful and unique they are. Two-handed, so that's the main negative on the keywords, but it's ranged and it's a bow. This costs a sinew and a bone to craft, which is great because it takes pressure off the lion claws that you need for other weapons from the Catarium. So again, wonderful. But let's look at bow before we then discuss the abilities. A bow specialization, you get when attacking with a bow, you may reroll any misses once. Because most bows are cumbersome, this is very strong because it makes up for you being unable to get to the blind spot most of the time. It just improves accuracy all round on a bow, so it's solid and really well designed for how bows function. It's a great specialization proficiency. Our mastery is amazing. Deadly 2, ignore cumbersome on all bows. The bow master is up there with one of the best survivor types you can have in the entire game. So this is, you're going to be making a bowmaster as soon as you can in the core game, and they are going to do so much work for you that is just phenomenal. In addition, bows may not have the deepest progression in the core game. They actually only have 2 bows, but it doesn't matter because the Catgut bow covers you all the way until you get the Phoenix's bow, and then the Phoenix's bow, which is the arc bow, will cover you for the rest of the campaign. It's amazing. So, then we go on to abilities. Cumbersome, we discussed before. It's not so bad with bows because bows have range, so if you're unable to move, it doesn't matter so much if you've got the range to help you reach the monster. On top of that, we have this ability that was added on later iterations of the Catgut bow. It's aiming. When you attack before rolling to hit, you may reduce the speed of this weapon by 1 to gain +2 accuracy for that attack. So that'll reduce the weapon profile to a 1, but give you a 5+ to hit with it. That's a nice ability to have. It's very thematic, it's very cool. It made a very, very strong weapon even stronger. On the affinity front, this is kind of a nothing affinity really. It has some uses, as we'll show on one example build you can do with bows, but for the most part, a down blue is way better than an up blue. This is the weakest of the blues, so it's fine. More affinities is better than none. Then we have a weapon profile. 2 speed, absolutely fine. 7+ accuracy, that's fair given how powerful this weapon is, and when you have the specialization, you're going to mitigate that to a certain degree. And 3 strength, well, as mentioned before, 3 strength is the minimum bar to entry I want on a weapon for this part of the campaign, so it passes all check marks. Catgut bow is amazing. I don't rank it in what order I'm going to craft it because it's using different resources to the others. In essence, the first sinew I get, even if I get it from the prologue White Lion, I'm going to be saving that and I'm going to be crafting the Catgut bow with it because this weapon is flexible, it's powerful, and it also does something we've not discussed yet, which is it can fire arrows. So let's take a look at our first arrow, the Clawhead arrow. The Clawhead arrow costs a single lion claw to craft, so it is putting pressure on our lion claw situation, but the lion claw is a relatively common drop from the White Lion, so it's not too much of a deal. It just means you're not going to craft this arrow until you've definitely crafted the bow, but that would be like putting the cart before the horse anyway. So the clawhead arrow is our first item that you can attack with. Well, strictly speaking, we had tools that you could attack with before, but this is the one of the first experiences of also ammunition and arrows. So as we can see, ammunition has this ammo type, and arrows do as well, where you have to have a bow in your gear grid to activate this, and then you're able to use its attack profile, but you'll borrow the range from the bow itself. And it's kind of, these are really interesting. They're almost always a use one per showdown, at least in the core game. You will find there's some versions that have multiple uses elsewhere, but it's essentially giving you a very powerful single shot, and also there's some interesting mechanics that are tied usually to the hit or sometimes dealing damage. So what we've got here is it's a slow, so you can never have more than one speed on it, and if you hit, the monster gains a -1 evasion token, so that's great. That's basically +1 accuracy for every survivor across the board, so it'll help synergize with your catgut bow. You can only use it once a showdown, so you only have one of these arrows, but oh boy, what an arrow. It's got the 1 speed, which with slow, that's like fine. 6+ to hit, a bit less than you'd like. Ideally, you'll be firing this with extra accuracy, but it has 6 strength. So this arrow can hit and harm phoenixes, level 1 phoenixes. So this arrow will be around for a long time and do a lot of work for you. On top of all of that, it has this lovely affinity here, so it can even connect to Lucky Charms, and as we know, bows can get masses of deadly in the late campaign, so this is super useful. Ultimately, you should be crafting a clawhead arrow, just one if you only have one catgut bow. However, if you ever want to see the game get a bit funny and wonky, you could craft multiple catgut bows, like 3 of them, and multiple clawhead arrows, and play a settlement where everybody shoots with bows except for one guy who's in the front line tanking. It's a pretty interesting experience. It's very homogeneous. Every showdown, you're kind of doing the same things with the survivors, but it is very, very, very powerful. Ultimately, I think that the clawhead arrow is a must craft unless you're skipping out on bows entirely, which is kind of unlikely in the core campaign, but you might be if you've got expansions that are giving you other options you're interested in playing with instead. Bows are incredible. They're another candidate for being like top 4 best weapon types in the game. I put them at number 4. Some people think axe is number 4. I don't disagree. I think that both of those two are excellent choices, and they're very, very, very powerful. So phenomenal little package here for bows. That's just great. Now we got the cat fang knife. So I discussed daggers in a lot of detail with the bone dagger. The cat fang knife is the first prestige weapon. It requires an elder cat teeth, which is a special strange resource that you only get by killing the level 3 white lion. Now here's the thing. If you kill the level 3 white lion, you're already packing pretty strong, pretty powerful weapons. So the cat fang knife needs to really impress to have an argument for it to be part of your repertoire. So let's take a dive into it and see if it passes muster. It's a weapon, melee, dagger. As I said, we discussed daggers previously. I like dagger a lot. I think it's a very fun weapon type. But dagger physical design, the stats and profile ethos that they have, tends to hold them back on that front. It has the bone keyword, that's a positive. So on the whole, decent set of keywords, nothing really to be concerned about there. Its ability here is on a perfect hit, gain +1 strength token. When knocked down, remove all your +1 strength tokens. It's solid. It's a solid ability. It mounts your strength upwards, and if you get those perfect hits, then you'll have bonus strength when it comes to trying to wound the monster. So that is very, very useful. You'll of course want Timeless Eye, and there are other ways that you can improve perfect hit range as well in expansions. So this is a solid ability, and it also has a ton of red affinities, so it's very easy to use this with, say, the White Lion armor set to get a lot of red affinities going. So on the whole so far, it's all positives, but the wheels kind of come off a bit when you start talking about the weapon profile. So first of all, it has 3 speed. That's actually great. 3 speed with a perfect hit triggered ability gives you more chances of scoring that perfect hit triggered ability, so that is great. You want this 3 speed, I think that's fine. 6+ accuracy. I would be happier if this accuracy was lower, because as we'll see from the strength below, it's better for this weapon to be only hitting on perfect hits, rather than hitting and just having a normal hit. And the reason for that is it has 2 strength. 2 strength wounds a level 1 White Lion on a 6+, half the time. You've gotten this weapon from killing a level 3 White Lion. So this is just really bad. It's a really bad base strength. Now, I get the design ethos of the Cat Fang knife. It is trying to be like, hey, it's got low strength to start with, but as you hit the monster more and more with perfect hits, your strength will power up and it'll become very good. The trouble is that's a snowball weapon, and if you can't get the snowball rolling, then you're not going to get to where you want it to be. As such, for me, the Cat Fang knife is mostly something I pass on. I'm not really interested in crafting it. By the time I could make it, I'm usually closing in on lantern daggers if I don't already have them, and lantern daggers are way better. So this weapon is kind of stranded in this game without a slot where it really fits. However, we try and find ways to make use of these weapons wherever possible. So if you wanted to really leverage the Cat Fang knife as much as possible, you're going to want to get Timeless Eye on the survivor who's using it. You're going to want to wear White Lion armor so you can get as much of that sorted as possible. You're going to want a Monster Tooth necklace to increase your strength. You're going to want high base strength as well. And you're going to want to encounter a Bone Witch. Now, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail here, but basically the Bone Witch can allow you to drop your accuracy so it is terrible and you're only hitting on maximum, like on perfect hits. So you can actually reduce your accuracy to the point where you're only hitting on perfect hits, and then you can run as much speed as you can possibly get stacked onto the survivor and get Timeless Eye, and you just hit on 9s and 10s and you roll buckets of dice, as many dice as you can possibly get. And in that situation, you'll start scaling the Cat Fang knife up very quickly, and it can become something that you can use. So it's a lot of work, it's a lot of fun. The other option is you can use the Cat Fang knife with the red charm. That basically turns all wound and rolls into a 6+, but it sort of disables this, and that's a bit of a shame, so it's not really something you want to be doing. So this is the only weapon I think is a bit of a pass within this, within the Catarium. It's just, I think if it had maybe 3 more strength, we'd be in a different situation. But for what is essentially a mid to late game weapon, it doesn't have mid to late game stats. So for the most part, I'm going to not bother with this because I'd rather get lantern daggers, which is a shame. Okay, so it's time for us now to talk about the White Lion set. I'm going to go through the armor points and words in advance just here because they're the same across the whole armor set. So we'll just get them out of the way. Armor set, those you need. Fur is a positive, it's a good keyword. Heavy is a negative. We discussed why in the past. It's just one of those things you deal with. The main thing to note is if you want to play with heavy gear, make sure you take Survival of the Fittest so you can re-roll the worst circumstances that could happen. I discuss all of that in the Bonesmith video. The White Line Helm and every single White Line piece provides 2 armor points base. That's a little low, because this costs a white fur and a great cat bone to craft. That's quite a lot. And as we'll see when we look at the set bonus, it's sort of this. You pay a price similar to what you would pay for leather armor, but you don't get leather armor levels of armor points. So I think this is a point low on what it should be. Really, it should either be a 3 or the set bonus should be given a +2. Either way, be aware of it. The armor's a little low for such an aggressive type of armor set. This ability is pretty fun. It's expensive to use. It costs an activation and a survival. It gives non-death insane survivors +2 strength until end of round, and all other survivors, including deaf insane survivors, get +1 insanity. So that's pretty good. It's a nice little support ability you can use if you happen to be out of position and unable to attack the monster. If you have Surge, you can also kind of use it on yourself to get a nice strength bonus, which might help with weapons that don't have enough strength. And it can help protect people's brains with some insanity. The tricky part of this is here. While the red puzzle affinity is fairly achievable, it turns out this blue affinity is very difficult to do. And the reason for that is our White Line coat is the only thing that provides this blue affinity. And this is in the hardest to connect orientation because most down-facing blue affinities in the core game are on headpieces. And our headpiece for the White Line set doesn't have a down blue, it has a down red. So that's tough. But let's talk about the White Line coat. This costs a white fur and a hide, so effectively 2 hide. It has a really fun ability. This is one of these monster movement abilities. Essentially, Pounce costs you your activation and your movement. You move 3 spaces in a straight line. If you hit anything along the way, like another survivor or an obstacle, you stop your movement. If you manage to move all 3 spaces, then you get to activate a melee weapon in your gear grid with +1 strength. Super useful, super cool. The issues with this ability, though, is how restrictive it is. You have to move 3 spaces, it has to be in a straight line, and you have to spend all of your turn, unless you have surging and dashing involved, in order to be able to do this. So it is an expensive ability to use, and that can hold it back. It does, however, have really neat synergy with reach melee weapons, because they can hit more spaces. So bear in mind, this is very good with reach. Okay, to complement that, we also have the White Line Gauntlet, which when we pounce gives us +1 accuracy for our next attack this turn. That's great because pouncing is rarely going to hit the blind spot. It takes a lot of work or a dash to get that going. So it's nice to get an extra accuracy. An extra accuracy is always good. Otherwise, it doesn't really do anything else. It doesn't contribute affinities, so it's one of the most awkward parts of the armor set, but it does have some fun applications and it is decent. Our skirt, left red, right red, these are good. This one's very good. That's all we have to say about it. It's a very generic piece of waist armor. You need it. Finally, White Line boots. I think these are probably the best piece of the armor set because they give you +1 movement when you connect both of these affinities. These affinities are a little tricky to connect, but you get this one via the white line skirt. This one generally needs support to get from another piece of gear. We'll look at some ways you can do that in the look at the builds at the end of this video. Lionskin Cloak is our last armor piece. This one isn't part of the White Lion armor set. However, it does have a few really interesting elements to it. First of all, keyword wise, it's got bone. Bone is a great keyword, and this means this armor set can be worn by armor piece can be worn by people of the skull. It also has synergies with other bone related things, so bone armor pieces are kind of, they're not super common in the early game. It's nice to have that. It also has flammable. That is just something to pay attention to when you're dealing with the Sunstalker and maybe some hunt events here or there. So it's not something to worry about. It's just something to be aware of. It has a good affinity here. This is a good affinity. This right facing green is very good. And it also has an amazing ability. Reduce damage from every hit suffered by 1 to a minimum of 1. Which is why this 0 armor up here isn't as bad as it looks. This ability does nothing if you're only getting hit for 1 damage at a time, but if a hit is at 2 damage or more, suddenly you start getting like pseudo armor everywhere that helps reduce the amount of damage you're taking. So definitely a very interesting piece of gear. On top of that, this is actually part of an armor set that, a hybrid armor set as they're called, that comes in the White Lion expansion. In the Lion Knight expansion, and it's a armor set that called Brawler, and it's an end game armor set, and it makes this appropriately end game. So it's actually a armor type that can be very valuable depending on the campaign you're playing and the mix of expansions. So this costs 2 white fur to craft, which is a reasonable cost, especially if you're using it as an end game armor piece. So I really like it. I think it's got great ability, I think it's interesting, it's unique, and it does get its own armor set later on, and it has People of the Skull synergy. It's good. Let's get on to the second of our items. This is a pseudo piece of armor. It's not actually armor. It costs a shimmering mane to craft. It's the Lion Headdress. It's an accessory, so this goes on your gear grid and you can wear it even if you're wearing headgear, and it adds 1 armor to your head. And it's flammable. That's a minor negative keyword. Okay, so there's a number of problems with this piece of gear, and I think it is the first genuine outright miss in the Catarium. So you're spending a whole one of your 9 slots to add 1 armor point to your head. You don't get any affinities, you don't have any other abilities. This is just basically gear slot and shimmering mane for 1 armor to the head. But there's another issue even further, and if I've got the resources over here, if we look at the shimmering mane, we'll see the shimmering mane is a piece of hide that you can archive to gain 2 basic hide resources. So this is 2 hide in 1, which means the hidden cost of the Lion Headdress is actually it costs 2 hide to craft. So do we craft the Lion Headdress, or do we archive it to convert it into 2 basic hide resources and craft some rawhide or help contribute towards our Lion Beast guitars or whatever? Yes we do. So this is a hard don't craft. Maybe in the future Team Death will do something to change what's going on with this card. They might update it to do something else. They might give it some interesting synergies or something, but as it stands right now, ignore this. Just keep it in the box. It's garbage. It's terrible. It's just awful. So skip. Let's get to something that's a bit more interesting. This is the Frenzy Drink. This requires a hefty pair of nuts to craft. That is the lion testes. And it is a consumable fragile item. So fragile means it can break. Consumable, some things might try and consume it. Worth it though, because it only costs 1 resource to craft, and that resource is an organ. It has a fairly unique consume ability. You activate, you consume, and you suffer the brain frenzy Frenzy Brain Trauma. There we are. We got there. We said it. You only use it once a showdown. So Frenzy is interesting because it gives you extra speed. It ignores slow on melee weapons. It gives you an extra point of strength. And it adds 1d5 to your insanity. But it does disable your ability to use weapon proficiencies and masteries. Specializations and masteries. So that can be a bit of a tricky point if you're playing a survivor who relies on their weapon proficiency and mastery, but if they don't, then you can get yourself some extra speed and strength, and that can have some interesting applications, especially with perfect hit weapons. The big negative with Frenzy Drink is it just doesn't have any affinities, so it only does one thing, and it does one thing once, which means this is the kind of card you sort of want to remember is around, and you might use it in certain specific builds, or you might never craft it at all. Either's fine. Just remember it exists. You may get some neat little frenzy synergies via fighting arts or things like that, and then you remember, oh yeah, that's the frenzy drink, we could make one of those. So it's fine. I think it's perfectly balanced as it is. I just don't think it's 100% autocraft all the time. Okay. That brings us to our penultimate item. This here one, on the other hand, I think is an autocraft. So this is the Whisker Harp. It is an item, it is an instrument, it's noisy. I've discussed before, instrument's a positive keyword, noisy is a very negative one, but the negative doesn't exist in in Nemesis showdowns. So be aware that there are risks if you take this out on the hunt. If you do want to use noisy items and not deal with the risks, Winter Solstice Lucy, who is a seasonal purchase, crops up around the holiday time near the end of the year, can give you a piece of gear that will ignore noisy on one item. So that's a way of using it. Otherwise, you can do what I do, which is I don't take it on hunts. I take it to showdowns. And oh boy, is it good for showdowns. So, on arrival, all survivors gain +1 survival. That's always nice, it's a great benefit. This ability here, though, that you activate is the reason the Whisker Harp is so very, very good. You get to strum, you roll a dice, and 50% of the time you discard a mood currently in play. So, Nemesis moods are really dangerous. The Butcher has some incredibly scary ones, including Lantern Frenzy, I believe its name is, where it will pick a survivor to be the priority target, and it will not stop going after them until they either run off into the darkness and you lose a load of stuff, or the Butcher kills them. The Whisker Harp offers an alternative way to get rid of this mood. So that's what I craft the Whisker Harp for, is Nemesis fights, and I craft it for the getting rid of the moods. This is such a good item. And it is so good that I will save the golden whiskers that are used to craft it if I get them in the prologue fight, so I can craft this right after killing my first level 1 white lion. Its crafting cost is also very reasonable. 1 golden whiskers, 1 bone, and you get this. It's a phenomenally good weapon. It even has a great affinity here that connects to the Lucky Charm weapon, item. It's a phenomenally great item. You can't bash people with harps yet. Maybe we'll get we're going to get some musical instruments you can hit things with eventually. But yeah, just a must craft for me. Even if I personally don't take it out on hunts all the time, because of that risk of the harvester causing a unavoidable death. Okay. So we've saved the best for last. Okay, let's go look at the cat Eye Circlet. So this item, which costs an Eye of Cat to craft, is our first introduction to hit location scouting. And it is something that defines the quote-unquote meta style of playing and is a core fundament for critical wound farming. It is a item, jewelry, other. So jewelry is a negative, other is a negative. You can get around the jewelry downside, but just making sure you have other jewelry in the gear grid, and it only really triggers if you get wiped versus fighting a white lion. So, you know, that is what it is. You just live with these. It also has a very good affinity here, that's great, and it has a lovely piece of art which I adore. But the big thing to note is this ability, which is you activate to reveal the next 3 monster hit locations and put them back in any order. So this is called deck manipulation. It's also deck scouting. Any game that lets you look at the top cards of a randomized deck to get information is strong. Information is incredible when you're dealing with decks. Information that you then get to reorder is even more powerful. So we're going to have a video on crit farming in the future, but the simple fact is you can use this Eye Circlet to push the trap away and delay it for as long as possible. You can use it to line up hit locations that will provide resources on a critical wound with deadly weapons. You can just set this up to make sure you know what's coming, and you can activate your survivors in the right order so they can deal with everything in the most beneficial way possible. It's really powerful. It's really just like one of the most dominant pieces of gear in the entire core game. You're going to want at least one, for sure. You may eventually reach a point where you don't want to use it anymore, and that's fine. Nothing beats knowledge, except for like actual revealed knowledge. But if you know the monster's hit location decks well enough, you can usually adapt your playstyle to not have to use scouting. But having one of these in your back pocket is always great. You might even find some people play with 2. Personally, I make 1, and I don't use it every single turn, but I will use it on key moments to try and get some information, set things up. It's just an amazing item and a must craft. So, that is all of the gear. But before we finish, let's take a look at the armor set bonus, because I forgot earlier, and then we will have a look at some builds. So the armor set bonus for white line armor is +1 to all hit locations. That makes the white line armor 3 in all locations, and then it lets you cosplay as a cat by giving you +1 speed and +2 strength when attacking with daggers or katars. So this is pretty solid. It'll make the Lion Beast Katar scale a bit further on, and it doesn't need Pounce to activate this either. It helps make the Bone Dagger more powerful. It supports the Cat Fang knife, but it's not super great at that. So I really like this this armor set bonus. I think it's great. I don't think it gives enough armor points though. I genuinely think this should be a 2. But you can make up for that by having a round leather shield in your gear grid, so that's a consideration, and it'll help. Right, let's go look at some builds, shall we? This is our core game. Look at everything, it's our core game here. Right, so this is one of the typical layouts you will put white line armor into, and what you can see here is how awkward the armor set is. We've had to put not just 1 but 2 weapons into the gear grid to activate these, but you'll notice I still haven't managed to activate the white line coat, or sorry, get this blue connected so I can activate the white line helm via the white line coat. Yeah, it's rough. It's really rough. So ultimately, I don't think you can get the white line helm active unless you are like quite far in the campaign or you are playing with expansions. It does, however, highlight some weapons that all have synergy with the set. So Bone Dagger, this becomes a 4-speed, 3-strength weapon. Pretty decent. Like, I would use a Bone Dagger with white lion armor, and I would use... I'd probably put it down here. Or you can use the counterweighted axe, which has reach and has a amazing perfect hit ability and likes working with pounce and everything, and it has good stat profile, so that will all combine up really well. Now, if you were going to go with the bone dagger, I would move these up to here. I would not worry about that. I'd have the bone dagger over here, and then I can move these around however I like to try and get things active. But there's also another thing you can do with bone dagger, which is if you have 4 affinities connected. So let's say you did 1, 2, 3, 4 like this. This could be another bone dagger. Suddenly you can use the red charm because it lagged the 5th, and this will give you a weapon that constantly wounds exactly 50% of the time. That's an interesting build that you can run, which will just scale all the way through the game, and your only real concerns then are scaling your armor points up to keep you going. Over here we'll just see a couple more things. Right, this is the King Spear. It's not as good as the counterweighted axe, but it does provide some extra little benefits because it has reach and it's a spear, so that's decent. Bone Club can make use of Pounce to be able to move and activate. This is probably the weakest of the Bone Club synergies outside the leather armor, but I did want to highlight it because it works pretty well. Last of all, with all these red affinities, you can always use a Monster Tooth necklace very easily to scale your weapon strength up further. However, if you really want to lean into using white line armor, I recommend you play with Gorm, because the Gorm gives us some wonderful synergy, and this is one of my favourite white line setups. So we're using 3 pieces of gear from the Gorm, 2 weapons, and 1 item to get everything. So we have our +1 movement, we have our white line helm, we have dagger synergy, and we have perfect hit synergy here that basically allows us to run pairs and make use of all the extra speed we get to try and score even more automatic wounds on drawn hit locations. And that's why Timeless Eye is here, because it will synergize even further with these abilities. You could run 1 Acid Tooth Dagger, but I'm going to run both if I get the opportunity. Phenomenal. The Gorn is also a non-noisy instrument. For now, I've heard rumours that it's going to be updated in Campaigns of Death to maybe be noisy. I think that's a shame, but until that actually happens, it's a great little utility instrument. I'm not going to go into details about it. It's just got a nice ability you'll use occasionally, but it adds this blue affinity. The thing is, even if you don't want to use the Gorn, if we just pull out of this, focus, and we grab this, you can run this, which is also from the Gorm and does that as well. It's a very situational ability, not very good, but that blue affinity, and it's not too expensive. We also have even more things we can do, so if you're not doing daggers, hey, look, you could run the Gax. Look, it connects up there. It gets extra speed, it gets savage. It even gives the monster -1 evasion when you critically wound it for the first time. That's great. Over here, we could ignore that and we could run the Pulse Lantern. A very useful lantern, so it's going to be helpful in the end part of the People of the Lantern core campaign. It has a great little ability that I'll discuss in detail in the Gorm video, but hey, boom, another option of a gear grid. You can even, with some rearranging, run the Greater Gax instead of the Gax, and that then gives you Deadly, and it gives you Reach 2, which means you've got Pounce synergy. So all of this is just fantastic, and that is why I highly rate the Gorm with the White Lion. I think they have a lot of synergies. There's even more than I've talked about here. They're just great expansions to complement each other. So let's talk about, instead, core game only. This is a rawhide build that is often used in the early portions of the campaign. This is a tank, DPS, support all rolled into one. You leverage in a Lion Beast Catar with the Lucky Charm to get extra deadly. You leverage in Monster Grease with the Rawhide Vest to get more evasion. This can be any left blue, or you could even reverse these and have a right facing blue. It doesn't really matter. The Fecal Salve is just the cheapest option and it has some nice abilities. Ultimately, this thing, I'll build 2 of these in the early game and I'll rotate them in the face of the monster. So one of them will be around the back, stabbing the monster. The other one will be up front, taking the hits and stabbing the monster. And then they'll change places when the first one, the tanking one, is too badly hurt. So it's a great little setup. You can run them purely as a DPS type by dropping the Monster Grease. then putting something else in there. You could run double line beast Qatar if you want instead of this. If you do that, they're less effective at taking frontline hits, but they still can do it in a pinch because they have a lot of armor points. They have rawhide armor, which gives survival refunds occasionally, allowing you to dodge more. So it's just a great loadout. And this base that we see here, ignoring the weapon, this is a very common early game base for just any kind of deadly weapon. Last of all, just a quick example of what you can do with bows. So the nice thing about a bow survivor is that they are they're able to use distance, which means they can put other survivors in between them and the monster, and that allows them to run less armor. So this is like virtually a naked bow survivor. You could have full rawhide armor in here, and you will do eventually, but even if we look here, we can see, hey, we've got our ability here, so it can do that. We've got this ability here, so we can do this. We've got claw, head, arrow to do that. It's like all helpful supporting abilities. And then we've got the catgut bow itself to let us shoot at distance, and a lucky charm. And these could all be like bandages, it could be fecal salve. There's a whole host of different options. And it's just the advantage of a bow. Of course, eventually you'll fill in the gear grid with rawhide. You might swap the lucky charm out and the Eye Circlet and put that into a different survivor. But yeah, this I find a very nice way of loading out a survivor early on quickly and getting my support bow survivor combo together. Right, that brings us to the end. So let's quickly summarise. So at least I can claim to be under an hour with this recording. Catarium provides a lot of dagger synergy, a lot of Qatar synergy, a lot of bow synergy, and reach synergy. It gives us a okay armor set that's a little bit weak for the price you pay, but offers some interesting options and allows you to cosplay as a kitty. And if you want to pounce at every time you pounce, you go meow or some other like really obnoxious noise. Please do. I thoroughly approve. Why are you wearing white line armor if you're not going to pretend to be a kitty? On the weapon front, the Qatar's amazing, the arrow's amazing, the King Spear's amazing, the catgut bow's amazing. The other cat fang knife requires a lot of work to make it work. So, yeah, probably the one of the weaker options here. Eye Circlet is just straight up the best piece of gear in the entire core game. Whisker Harp is amazing for nemesis monsters. Lion Headdress is just a waste of cardboard. Lionskin Cloak is situationally decent depending on campaign and expansions, and Frenzy Drink is also situationally decent. So that's it. That's the Catarium, and thank you very much for listening. If I will be putting one of these videos out every week going ahead, so it'll be same time, same channel next week. You can also support me on my Patreon, where I put a written article out every Friday, usually on Kingdom Death, sometimes other boss battlers. And otherwise, thank you very much for listening, and happy hunting.